Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be on here with you today. If you have a Bible or Bible app, go ahead and turn over with me. We're going to be in Psalm 28. Psalm 28. If you're new to the program, my name is Curtis Cooper. I'm with the Stony Creek Church of Christ, and we're just trying to get people in the Bible, trying to spend time in the Bible ourselves. And we've been going through the Psalms, and man, the Psalms are just raw. They're real. They've been really helpful for me. It's been really good for me to be able to just think and meditate on the things that David has to say for us. So we're going to be in Psalm 28. And what we know about this psalm is that it's a psalm of David, according to the header. We've seen that in a lot of different psalms throughout, especially this section of the book. And there's been some common themes, some patterns that we find. Most of them begin with David crying out to God, and then it ends with God praising, or David praising God for answering his prayer, or the fact that David has confidence that God will answer his prayer. This is what they call a Davidic lament. It has four basic sections to it. Number one, David cries out to God. Number two, David asks not to be punished with the wicked. Number three, David praises God for being his strength and his shield. And then number four, David prays for others, and he praises God for being their strength and their refuge. And so as with many of the Psalms in this section, they're written in a very dark period of David's life. And so we see trouble, we see a desperation, and then eventually we see trust and we see faith in God. And the themes of this psalm is very much like the themes of most of David's life. It's trouble, it's crying out, it's appealing to God, it's trusting him, it's praising God. And we're not really given any indication, or not much of an indication, as to the time of David's life that this is written. So we're going to dig right in. We're going to figure out some things that we see in this psalm, and then try to take this and meditate on it. So we're going to look at the first three verses. Let's read that together. Psalm 28, verse 1. He says, "To you I will cry out, O Lord, my rock. Do not be silent to me, lest if you are silent to me, I become like those who go down to the pit. Hear the voice of my supplications when I cry to you, when I lift up my hands towards your holy sanctuary." And so David's troubled. He's in distress. And so what does David do? Well, he does the only right thing that we all should do, that is turn to the Lord. He cries out to God. Makes sense. Wouldn't make sense to turn and cry to man, because what is man going to do for us? God is really the only one to turn to. And so David declares God as his rock. We've seen David call God his rock in several different sections of the Psalms, Psalm 18, Psalm 20, or Psalm 19. It's always a declaration of God being David's solid ground, his stability, his fortress, his protection, his refuge, or his strength, his deliverer, his shield. And so think about the general circumstance here. David's in trouble and he needs deliverance. David needs a stable place to stand on before his enemies. And so God was that. God had been to David for so many different times in his life, like with the bear and the lion when he was protecting his flock, or with the giant Goliath as he protecting God's people and his armies. With Saul as he was being chased around the countryside with the king and his armies trying to kill him, or with Absalom's rebellion as Absalom was trying to overthrow David and actively trying to take over, and many, many other times in David's life. And David was sure that God was going to deliver him. He'd been in trouble before, and God delivered him. David knew that God is the only stable place to stand on. And so David had this hope that God was solid. He was immovable. God is the one that David could trust in. He's not going to sway in the wind, but he's firm. And David knew that. David experienced that. David knew that he could trust and depend on him. And so David pleads to God to hear him and to answer him, like 2 or 3 different times here in different ways. He says, "Do not be silent to me." And then he says, "Hear the voice of my supplications when I cry to you." And he's pleading to God based upon 2 different qualities. Number one, David's not going to make this out of this alive. He's desperate. He's really hopeless without the Lord. And if God didn't listen and didn't respond, he was going to go down to the pit. And I think that's a way of saying that he was going to be in the grave. People who are wicked, people who are criminals, to kind of get rid of their bodies, they would just kind of throw them in a pit, in a mass grave. And so he's going to die at the hands of his enemies, and he's going to suffer their fate. He needs the Lord to hear him, to be with him, to hear and answer him. And the second thing that he says is that David pleads to God to hear him based upon his reverence. He's turned to the Lord. He's pleading with this intensity, and he raises his voice out to God, not just to himself, but he's got this desperate vocal prayer to God, and he's facing God's presence, aimed towards the tabernacle or the sanctuary, and he lifts up his hands to God. Notice he was fully focused on God the entire way, with his hands raised to God. By the way, that was a typical way that the Jews would pray. They would raise their hands with their hands open, like a desperate, craving beggar with his hands out. But it represented this idea of both giving supplication, giving of ourselves, and receiving an answer. And so it was an expression of faith. And then look at the next section. So David pleads with God to hear him, and here's David's plea, that he would not be taken away with him, with his enemies. And David's pleaded this before. Remember back in chapter 26 and verses 4 and 5, David pleaded that this based upon how he did not sit with them, he didn't go with them, he hated their assembly, so he wasn't there. See, he understood how evil company corrupts good habits, and because of that, David was very careful on who he let into his sphere of influence. He didn't do what they did. He wasn't where they were. And so David says, I've walked in your truth in Psalm 26. Then in 27, David pleads not to be counted with them. He wasn't like them. He lived very differently than them. And now in chapter 28, he says, don't take me away with them. Don't punish me with them. I'm not with them. I'm not around them. I don't live like them here, and I don't deserve what they do deserve. I don't want their destiny. And that's David's plea. He didn't want to be with them here. He didn't want to be with them in destiny. And so David further separates himself by describing these people. They speak peacefully to their neighbor. What's going on in their heart, though? Do you notice that? Evil things. Their words and their heart, their thoughts, they didn't match up. They say one thing, but they're thinking another. They're hypocrites. Their tongue and their hearts aren't in sync with one another. It reminds me of one more passage in Psalm 55 in verse 21. I think it's a pretty good example of this. He says, the words of their mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, and yet they were drawn swords. That's not good at all. They're laying it on thick, like buttering them up, flattering them, saying good things about them. But in their heart, there was a war going on with them. They're soft and smooth in what they're saying to your face, but really behind your back, they're ready to stab you. That's not the kind of person you want to be around. That's not the kind of person you want to be. And yet there are some people that would look at these passages and think, okay, well, I'll just make my words match my heart. I'll just war at them with my words. Well, that's not really the point here. The point is that it's not just what they say, it's also what's in their hearts. We have a lot of passages that warn us about being a hateful person and using hateful words with people. Now, these just don't sound like people you want to be around. They're hypocritical, and that's not right. And David didn't want to be with them, be that kind of person in this life. He wanted nothing to do with them. And David didn't want the destiny that those people deserve because of what they did. And so David pleads with God that, God would give them a just punishment. Notice what David's saying. Number one, their words and their thoughts didn't match. Please make their punishment match their works, their deeds. Please don't mistake me in sharing in their destiny because I'm living differently. Destroy them. And there's 3 different reasons he says destroy them. Number one, because of what they do. And he says it like 3 different ways. Their deeds, their wickedness in their heart, and the work of their hands. So what they think, what they do, how they're living. And so punish them, give them what they've got coming to them. And because, he says, because they deserve it. And David says, basically, like, give them their due reward. Give them what they deserve. Let them reap what they sow. Give them what they earn. Give them their just reward. Honestly, we all deserve it. We all, just including David, have sinned and fall short of God's mercy, God's glory. But think about it. A man could turn to God and say, Lord, don't judge me according to my deeds, but according to your mercy. But if we're judged according to our deeds, that's not good. We're going to be we're deserving of destruction. And notice where they went wrong here. He says at the end, he says, because they didn't regard the work of the Lord. They weren't concerned what the Lord does. They didn't regard the Lord at all. They didn't respect him. And because of that, they rejected him. David's not pleading because these people are his enemies, because he hates these people, doesn't like them. No, he's pleading for God to destroy them because they're enemies of God. This is not a personal or a political motivated thing. This is their rejection of God's things. This is them ignoring what God does and their disrespect for God. And they deserve the punishment because of what their hands do. And they disregard and disrespect what God does in the operation of his hands. So they're not turning to God and asking for mercy. They're not trying to do any better than what they're doing. And they're going to be destroyed because of it. And that's what David's asking for. Look at verses 6 and 7. In verses 6 and 7, there's this transition in the text from this desperate plea to the praising of God for answering his plea. There's one of two things that's happened. There's a change in David's circumstance because God answered his prayer, or there could be a change in David. He started with this desperate plea and he started focusing more on God because he started focusing on how God is his rock and what God could do with his hands. He then started having confidence in what God will do for him. But honestly, I'm not sure which one it is. I don't have a strong preference. Either way, David is praising God here. And in verse 6, think about it. What's David's plea at the beginning? Do not be silent. Hear the voice of my supplication. Now in verse 6, what's David's praise for God here? Because he heard the voice of my supplication. And again, two possibilities. Either God heard and he's already answered, or God heard and David has faith that he will answer. Just the fact that God hears us, that is amazing and it deserves our praise. But the fact that sometimes God answers our prayers in the ways that we ask them, that is amazing. And either way, prayers deserve, the fact that God hears us deserves our praise. And the fact that God hears and answers the way that we ask sometimes deserves our praise. We're not always good at praising God for answered prayers, are we? But we should be. Look at verse 7. Think about it. What did David call God at the beginning of the psalm? His rock. And what does he call him here? His strength and his shield. In other words, his protection, his stability. He is his deliverer. God is the one that wins the battles for David. See, at the beginning, what does David feel in his heart? He feels distress. He feels despair. But he no longer feels that way. What does he feel here? Did you notice? He has a heart that rejoices, that overflows outwardly, but he cannot but to sing God's praises. And so what's the difference between the two? Between the way David was and now the way that David is, what's the difference between the two? He had trust in his heart for God. He is completely trusting the Lord. He has confidence in God's help, and he's relieved, and he's overjoyed. And so remember the contrast. His enemies had evil in their hearts, and because of that, they're going to be destroyed. Now, David has trust and joy in his heart, and he's going to be delivered because of it. There's a heart difference between the two. Now, go to the end of the psalm. We'll just look at verses 8 and 9 here. Verses 8 and 9. David turns from looking at himself and praying and pleading for himself to others. And that's what focusing on the Lord should do. It should make us focus on the Lord and others. See, the Lord is not just David's strength, but he's their strength. He's our strength. The Lord is not just David's rock. He's our refuge. He's our strength. And to all those who belong to him. And that's true for us too. Like, God is our strength. There's no other place that we can go through, there's just nowhere else that we can go that can get us through this life like the Lord. God is our refuge. When we have health issues, when we have financial issues, when we have enemies, when we have struggles, what should we do? We should turn to the Lord. He's our strength and our refuge. He is our protection. He is our savior. And then David turns and he starts praying for God's people in verse 9, as we should. We shouldn't just want to hoard up God's blessings for ourselves, but we want God to bless others. And look what David prays for them, that God saves them, that he blesses them with their inheritance, that God shepherds them, that God bears them up. Think about God shepherding and bearing us up. He looks out for us. He protects us. He guides us. He provides for us. What an incredible psalm. There's a lot for us to take, a lot for us to meditate on, really focus on. And so I encourage you, don't just shut your Bibles, but open up Psalm 28, study it, ruminate on it, meditate on it, think about the application for yourself. I hope that's been helpful to you. It's really been helpful to me. I've really loved and appreciated these Psalms. So hope you're having a great Thursday. And Lord willing, we'll be back on tomorrow. We'll keep reading. I'm not sure where we're going to go after 3 John. I haven't given that enough thought yet. We may just look at Jude. I don't know where we'll be tomorrow, but we'll pick a place. We'll read some, and then we'll talk about what we read. Hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Glad that you were on here today. God bless everybody.